The void between stars had always been humanity's greatest enemy, but today it brought salvation in the form of a desperate transmission. Captain Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the decryption algorithms work their magic on the alien signal that had reached them 3 hours ago. "It's definitely not one of ours," Lieutenant Commander Anna Torres reported from her station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. "The quantum signature is completely foreign, but the mathematical constants are universal enough that we can parse the basics." Kane nodded grimly. In the 2 centuries since humanity had begun its exodus from Earth, they had encountered 17 different alien species. 15 had tried to destroy them on sight. The other 2 had simply ignored them, which was almost worse. But this signal was different. It carried the unmistakable resonance of terror. "What are they saying?" Kane asked. Torres's face paled as she processed the translation. They're running from something they call the Devourers. The transmission is from a species called the Veltar, and they're warning anyone who can hear them to flee the core systems immediately. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Kane had seen that look before, the same expression his ancestors had worn when the first colony ships had launched from a dying Earth, when entire populations had fled into the cosmic dark rather than face extinction. "How far out are they?" Kane asked. "The signal originated from the Kepler 442 system," Torres replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's only 47 light-years from here. Sir, if these Devourers are real, and if they're moving this way..." She didn't need to finish. Everyone on the bridge understood the implications. The human fleet was already running, had been running for generations, but now they might have to run from something far worse than environmental collapse or resource depletion. Kane activated the ship-wide comm system. "All hands, this is the captain. We've received a priority alien transmission that requires immediate analysis. All department heads report to Conference Room Alpha in 10 minutes. As the bridge crew began their preparations, Kane stared out at the stars that had been both humanity's highway and prison for so long. They had thought they were running towards something better, a new world where they could finally stop and rebuild, but perhaps they had always been running from something instead. The doors to the conference room slid open with mechanical precision as Kane entered. Around the table sat the finest minds humanity had to offer. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist, who had first made contact with peaceful alien species. Commander James Liu, the tactical officer who had kept them alive through countless encounters with hostile forces. And Chief Engineer Paul Anderson, the man who had kept their aging fleet functional far beyond its designed lifespan. "Show them," Kane ordered. The holographic display activated, revealing the translated message in stark, glowing text. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of entire civilizations. "They consume everything. They leave nothing. We tried to fight. We failed. Run while you still can." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity warring with obvious dread. "The linguistic patterns suggest this species is highly advanced, possibly more so than us. If they're running, if they're warning others to run, then we're all in trouble," Commander Liu finished grimly. Kane studied the faces around the table, faces that had seen humanity through its darkest hours, faces that had never given up hope even when the odds seemed impossible. They were the ones who had always fled, always adapted, always survived. "Prep the fleet," Kane ordered. "We're changing course." The Veltar ship appeared on their sensors like a ghost materializing from the void, massive, elegant, and dying. The hull bore scars that no human weapon could have made, twisted metal that seemed to flow like liquid where something had burned through their defenses. "They're hailing us," Torres reported, her voice tight with tension. Kane straightened in his command chair. On screen, the being that appeared before them was tall and graceful, with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. Its large, dark eyes held an expression that needed no translation, the hollow look of a survivor who had seen too much. "I am First Speaker Kyle of the Veltar Remnant Fleet," the alien spoke, the translation software rendering its voice in measured, formal tones. "We thank you for responding to our distress beacon. Are you also fleeing the Devourers?" Kane exchanged glances with his crew. "We received your warning transmission. We're taking precautions." Kale's expression shifted, something that might have been bitter amusement. "Precautions. Yes, we thought precautions would be sufficient as well. We had fleets that spanned 1,000 worlds, armies that had never known defeat, weapons that could crack planets. The Devourers came anyway." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward at her station. "What exactly are these Devourers? Are they a species? A collective intelligence?" "They are hunger," Kale replied simply. "They arrive without warning, consume everything organic, and move on. No negotiation, no communication beyond their need to feed. We tried to study them, to understand them. That was our mistake." The main screen shifted, showing tactical data from the Veltar ship. Kane felt his blood run cold as he processed the numbers. The Veltar had been running for 8 months, and they were the survivors of a population that had numbered in the billions. "How many of you are left?" Kane asked quietly. "This ship carries the last 12,000 of my people," Kale said. "We have no home to return to, no worlds that remember our names. We are what you would call refugees, I believe." Kane made a decision that would change the course of both species. "You're welcome to travel with our fleet. Humanity has experience being refugees." For the first time since the transmission began, something resembling hope flickered in Kale's eyes. "You would do this? Even knowing that the Devourers hunt us?" "We've been running from death for 200 years, Kane replied. "What's one more enemy?" The integration process took 3 days. Human and Veltar engineers worked side by side, sharing technologies and techniques born from desperation. The Veltar ships were faster but less durable than human vessels. The human ships were more robust, but lacked the elegant energy systems that had kept the Veltar running for months without resupply. Dr. Vasquez spent hours with Veltar scientists, learning about their encounters with the Devourers. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its simplicity. The Devourers appeared as a swarm of organic ships, each one roughly the size of a human destroyer, but able to replicate rapidly by consuming available matter. They showed no interest in technology or civilization, only in the carbon-based life forms they seemed to crave. "They're not evil," Dr. Vasquez explained to the senior staff during their evening briefing. "Evil implies choice, intent. These things are more like a natural disaster with teeth. They consume, reproduce, and move on. The Veltar estimate they've consumed at least 40 different civilizations in the past decade." Commander Liu studied the tactical data with professional interest. "Their attack patterns show no innovation, no adaptation. They just swarm and overwhelm through sheer numbers. That's actually encouraging. It means they can be predicted." "Predicted, maybe," Kane said. "But can they be stopped?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Outside the conference room windows, the combined human-Veltar fleet moved through space at maximum sustainable speed, running from an enemy that had already proven unstoppable. But for the first time in months, they weren't running alone. Cocked. Attack came at 0347 ship time, when the night watch was at its most vulnerable, and the day crew was still 3 hours from shift change. The Devourers didn't announce themselves with grand declarations or ultimatums. They simply materialized at the edge of sensor range like a spreading stain against the stars. "Contact!" Ensign Rita Park called out from the sensor station, her voice cracking with adrenaline. "Multiple bogies bearing 27 Mark IV. There's hundreds of them." Kane was on the bridge in 90 seconds, his uniform hastily thrown on over sleep clothes. The tactical display showed a sight that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. A cloud of organic ships spreading across space like spores, each one pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested hunger rather than intelligence. "Wake everyone," Kane ordered. "Battle stations throughout the fleet. Get me First Speaker Kale on the comm." The Veltar leader's image appeared instantly, his 4 arms moving in what Kane had learned was a gesture of extreme agitation. "They found us. I had hoped we might have more time, but they are faster than we calculated." Kane studied the tactical display as the human and Veltar ships moved into defensive formations. The Devourers were approaching at significant sublight speeds, but they weren't simply rushing forward in a mindless charge. They were spreading out, encircling the refugee fleet with methodical precision. They're trying to prevent us from jumping to FTL, Commander Liu observed, his fingers dancing across the tactical console. They've done this before. Dr. Vasquez's voice came over the comm from her lab. Captain, I need to share something. The Veltar data suggests these things aren't just predators, they're farmers. They corral their prey, prevent escape, then consume everything at their leisure. Kane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. How long do we have? At their current approach speed, they'll be in weapons range in 47 minutes, Liu reported. Kale, what did your people try when they fought these things? The Veltar leader's image flickered as his ship maneuvered. Everything. Kinetic weapons barely scratch their hulls. Energy weapons are absorbed and converted to fuel their reproduction. Nuclear weapons only feed them faster. Kane closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of humanity's long history of facing impossible odds. His ancestors had faced extinction from climate change, resource depletion, and hostile alien encounters. They had survived by being adaptable, by thinking differently, by refusing to accept defeat even when defeat seemed certain. What about the one thing they haven't encountered? Kane mused aloud. Sir? Torres asked. Kane activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is the captain. We're about to face an enemy that has consumed 40 different civilizations. They've adapted to every conventional weapon, every defensive strategy, every attempt at negotiation or escape. But they've never faced humanity before. He paused, looking around the bridge at faces that reflected determination rather than despair. We're not going to run this time. We're not going to hide. We're going to do what humans have always done when backed into a corner. We're going to improvise. The Devourers were 30 minutes out when Kane implemented his plan. Instead of maintaining defensive formations, the human ships scattered in seemingly random directions. The Veltar, following the tactical data they were receiving, did the same. They're adapting, Liu reported. The Devourers are splitting their forces to pursue individual ships. Good, Kane said grimly. That's exactly what we want them to do. 20 minutes out, the human ships began jettisoning cargo containers, not randomly, but in carefully calculated patterns that would intersect with the Devourers' pursuit paths. The containers were filled with the most dangerous substances humanity had ever created. Antimatter containment fields programmed to fail on specific timers. The Veltar data suggests they absorb energy to reproduce. Dr. Vasquez's voice came over the comm. But antimatter annihilation isn't energy they can process. It's the fundamental destruction of matter itself. 15 minutes out, the first containers detonated. The explosions were visible even at interstellar distances, brilliant flashes of pure energy that briefly outshone nearby stars. Where Devourer ships had been pursuing human vessels, there were now expanding clouds of plasma and debris. But the celebration was premature. For every Devourer destroyed, two seemed to take its place, rising from the destruction like phoenixes, made of nightmare. They're adapting faster than expected, Liu reported grimly. The ones behind are avoiding the antimatter traps. Kane gripped the arms of his command chair. The Devourers were learning, but humanity had one more trick that no other species had ever tried. All ships, Kane announced, implement Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega had been conceived during humanity's darkest hour, when Earth was dying and the first colony ships were preparing to launch into the unknown. It was based on a simple premise. If humanity was going to die, they would ensure their deaths meant something. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the Vanguard was the first to volunteer. Her ship was one of the oldest in the fleet, her crew one of the most experienced. They had been running for 37 years, had seen the birth of 3 generations in the cramped corridors of their vessel. Captain Rodriguez to Fleet Command, her voice came over the comm with perfect calm. The Vanguard is moving to intercept the main Devourer swarm. We'll buy you the time you need. Kane wanted to object, to find another way, but the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Devourers had adapted to the antimatter traps and were closing in on the refugee fleet from multiple vectors. They needed a distraction, something spectacular enough to draw the entire swarm's attention. Elena, Kane said quietly. You don't have to do this. Rodriguez's laugh carried over the comm channel, warm and utterly human in its mixture of fear and determination. Marcus, my crew and I have been running our entire adult lives. Our children were born running. Their children might be born running too if we don't end this here. The Vanguard peeled away from the fleet, accelerating toward the densest concentration of devourer ships. Rodriguez had ordered her engineers to overload the fusion reactors, creating an unstable cascade that would turn the entire ship into a weapon of unprecedented destructive power. But the devourers were already learning. Kane watched in horror as organic ships began to spread out, refusing to cluster together where a single explosion could destroy multiple units. "They're adapting to our sacrifice plays," Commander Liu reported. "The swarm intelligence is faster than we calculated." That was when First Speaker Kale made his decision. "Human ships, this is the Veltar Remnant Fleet." Kale's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "We have something the Devourers have never encountered before. A combination of human courage and Veltar technology." On the tactical display, Kane watched as the 12 remaining Veltar ships moved into a tight formation around the Vanguard. Their elegant hulls began to glow with energy patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with some cosmic heartbeat. "What are you doing?" Kane demanded. "Something our scientists theorized but never dared attempt," Kale replied. "We're creating a resonance cascade between our quantum cores and your fusion reactors. The energy release will be significant." Dr. Vasquez's voice cut through the calm chatter, sharp with sudden understanding. "They're creating a controlled singularity. The gravitational effects alone will—" The explosion, when it came, was visible from 3 star systems away. The Vanguard and the 12 Veltar ships vanished in a sphere of annihilation that consumed everything within a light-minute radius. The Devourers caught in the blast didn't just die. They were unmade. Their exotic matter converted to pure energy that burned like a newborn star. But the cost was staggering. 13 ships, carrying the last of the Veltar civilization and some of humanity's finest people, had sacrificed themselves to buy time for the others. Kane stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the expanding sphere of destruction on the long-range sensors. The remaining Devourer ships had stopped their pursuit, apparently stunned by the magnitude of the explosion. "Casualty report," he said quietly. Torres's voice was thick with emotion. "The Vanguard. All hands lost. The Veltar Remnant Fleet. Complete. Destruction. Total casualties. 4,327 souls." The bridge fell silent. In the space of minutes, they had gone from a combined human Veltar fleet to a purely human force carrying the responsibility for 2 species survival. "Sir," Ensign Park called from the sensor station, her voice barely a whisper. "The Devourers, they're withdrawing." Kane looked up sharply. On the tactical display, the surviving Devourer ships were indeed pulling back, their organic forms moving away from the expanding energy field. "They're afraid," Dr. Vasquez said with sudden realization. "For the first time in their existence, they've encountered something that can truly threaten them. They're afraid of us." Kane activated the fleet-wide comm system. "All ships, this is the captain. Our friends gave their lives to show the Devourers something they've never seen before. That there are forces in this universe willing to fight back. We're going to honor their sacrifice by doing what we do best. We're going to survive." The human fleet began to move, not running this time, but advancing with purpose toward the retreating Devourers. They had learned something important. Even the most perfect predator could be taught fear. The derelict Devourer ship tumbled through space like a broken toy, its organic hull split open by forces it was never designed to withstand. Dr. Vasquez led the boarding party herself, accompanied by a full security detail and the most advanced scanning equipment the fleet could provide. "Atmosphere is breathable barely," reported Sergeant Tom Hayes, the team's security chief. "High oxygen content. But there's something else in the mix. The bioscanners are going crazy." Vasquez moved carefully through the ship's interior, her suit lights illuminating corridors that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. The walls weren't constructed, they were grown, forming organic passages that branched and merged like the interior of some massive organism. "Captain," she transmitted back to the Defiance, "this isn't a ship in any sense we understand. It's a living creature, modified for space travel. The entire structure is one organism." Kane's voice crackled through the comm. "Are you saying the Devourers are their ships?" "I'm saying the distinction doesn't exist for them," Vasquez replied, her tricorder readings confirming her worst fears. "The ship, the crew, the weapons systems, they're all one entity. And Captain, I think I know why they consume other life forms. The central chamber of the creature was vast, its walls lined with what could only be described as cocoons. Inside each translucent sac, Vasquez could see partially formed organisms, some recognizably devourer in nature, others clearly based on the species they had consumed. They're not just predators, she breathed. They're collectors. Each species they consume becomes part of their genetic library. They're trying to achieve some kind of biological perfection by absorbing the best traits of every species they encounter. Sergeant Hayes moved closer to one of the cocoons, his weapon trained on the motionless form inside. Doc, some of these things, they look familiar. Vasquez followed his gaze and felt her blood run cold. The creature in the nearest cocoon had 4 arms and shimmering skin, unmistakably Veltar characteristics. But it also had human facial features, and what appeared to be the chitinous armor of another species entirely. They're making hybrids, she whispered, taking the best of each species and combining them into something new. Kane's voice was grim over the comm. Doctor, get out of there. Now. Wait, Vasquez said, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. There's something else. The neural pathways in these creatures, they're not individual minds. They're all connected, part of a larger consciousness. The entire devourer swarm might be a single distributed intelligence. That explained their tactical adaptations, their ability to learn from each encounter and share that knowledge instantly across their entire force. But it also suggested something else, something that made Vasquez's heart race with possibility. Captain, if they're all connected, if they share a collective consciousness, then they might be vulnerable in ways we haven't considered. The comm channel filled with static as something massive moved through the derelict ship. The walls began to pulse faster, and the cocoons started to crack open. Doctor, we're reading massive bioelectrical activity throughout the ship. Kane's voice was urgent. Get your team out immediately. Vasquez and her team ran through the organic corridors as the ship came alive around them. The creatures in the cocoons were awakening, their hybrid forms struggling to break free from their biomechanical wombs. They made it to the airlock just as the first hybrid burst into the corridor behind them. It moved with impossible speed, its Veltar arms and human intelligence combining with predatory instincts that belonged to neither species. The shuttle bay doors of the Defiance sealed behind them as the derelict ship suddenly accelerated, moving away from the human fleet with purpose rather than the random drift of debris. It was playing dead, Sergeant Hayes gasped as they removed their helmets. The whole damn thing was playing dead until we got close enough to study. Vasquez nodded grimly. It wanted us to see what's inside. The Devourers aren't just consuming species randomly. They're building something. An ultimate life form that combines the best traits of every species they've encountered. Kane appeared in the shuttle bay, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. Doctor, what exactly did we just walk into? A trap, Vasquez replied. But also an opportunity. If the Devourers are a collective consciousness, if they share memories and experiences across their entire network, then we've just given them something they've never had before. Which is? Vasquez managed a tired smile. Human stubbornness. They absorbed our genetic material when we boarded that ship, and with it, they absorbed something they can't process or control, our refusal to give up. Kane stared at her. You're saying we infected them? I'm saying we introduced a virus into their collective consciousness. A virus called hope. The change began subtly, with individual devourer ships breaking formation and moving in patterns that defied their collective intelligence. Within hours, entire sections of the swarm had gone silent, their bioluminescent communications networks flickering and dying like synapses in a diseased brain. They're fighting themselves, Commander Liu reported from the tactical station, his voice filled with amazement. The collective consciousness is fragmenting. Some ships are attacking others in their own swarm. Kane stood before the main view screen, watching the most powerful predator in known space tear itself apart. The human genetic material that Dr. Vasquez had inadvertently introduced during the boarding operation was spreading through the Devourer network like a philosophical contagion. It's not just our genetics, Dr. Vasquez explained during the emergency briefing. It's our memories, our experiences, our fundamental approach to existence. Humans have survived for millennia by questioning authority, by thinking independently, by refusing to accept the status quo. We've introduced individual consciousness into a collective mind, and it's causing a cascade failure. The tactical display showed the devourer swarm splitting into smaller groups, each one moving in different directions. Some continued their original mission, consuming everything in their path. Others had stopped attacking entirely, their ships drifting aimlessly as if their purpose had been forgotten. "We're receiving transmissions," Torres announced. "Multiple frequencies, all from different devourer ships. The translation algorithms are struggling, but I think some of them are trying to communicate." Kane felt a chill of possibility. On screen, the being that appeared was definitely a devourer, but different from any they had encountered. Its organic form retained the characteristic predatory features, but there was something in its multifaceted eyes that hadn't been there before. Individual awareness. I am no longer what I was," the creature spoke, its voice a harmony of different tones as the translation software struggled with concepts that had no precedent. "The unity is broken. I think, therefore I am separate." Kane stepped forward, his diplomatic training warring with centuries of human caution. "What do you want?" "To understand," the devourer replied. "We consumed your essence, expecting to add your strengths to our collective. Instead, you have given us questions we cannot answer. Why do you fight when you know you will lose? Why do you sacrifice yourselves for others? Why do you hope when hope is illogical?" Dr. Vasquez leaned forward at her station. "Because that's what makes us human. We don't fight because we know we can win. We fight because the alternative is unacceptable." The devourer's form rippled with what might have been confusion. "This creates discord, pain. Before we knew our purpose. Consume, grow, perfect. Now we question purpose itself." Kane made a decision that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. "Would you like to learn about choice?" Over. The following days, the human fleet found itself in the unprecedented position of teaching philosophy to a fragmenting hive mind. Ships that had once been part of the terrifying devourer collective were now individual entities, each struggling to understand concepts like personal identity, free will, and moral responsibility. Not all of them adapted well. Some fragments of the collective consciousness fought desperately to maintain the old order, launching attacks against both the humans and their own rebellious ships. The space around the fleet became a battlefield between different versions of what the devourers were becoming. "We're witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of consciousness," Dr. Vasquez reported to Kane during one of their evening briefings. "Some of the fragments are developing human-like individuality. Others are forming smaller collective minds based on shared experiences. A few are trying to return to their original state." Kane studied the tactical reports showing the ongoing conflict between different devourer factions. "How many are siding with us?" "Approximately 30% of the original swarm has embraced individual consciousness," Commander Liu replied. "Another 20% are forming hybrid collective individual minds. The remaining 50% are either fighting to restore the original collective or have simply shut down entirely." Kane activated the fleet-wide comm system. "All ships, this is the captain. We've accomplished something unprecedented. We've turned the galaxy's most dangerous predator into the galaxy's most dangerous ally. But this is just the beginning. We've given them consciousness, but consciousness without purpose leads to chaos." He paused, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite as cold or empty as they had before. "It's time to stop running. It's time to give them, and us, something worth fighting for." The human fleet changed course, heading not away from populated systems, but toward them. They carried with them a message that would transform galactic civilization. The devourers were no longer the ultimate threat. They were the ultimate opportunity. 3 months after first contact with the fragmented devourers, Captain Kane stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, humanity's first permanent structure in over 2 centuries. Around him, the strangest sight in galactic history unfolded. Human engineers working alongside reformed devourers to construct something that had never existed before. A truly multi-species alliance. The individual devourers had chosen names for themselves, a concept that had taken weeks to explain. The one called Wanderer approached Kane, its organic form now decorated with bioluminescent patterns that spelled out mathematical equations in human notation. The others of my former collective approach, Wanderer communicated through a translation device that had been grown rather than built. They have unified under the old consciousness. They come to reclaim us. Kane nodded, grimly. Long-range sensors had detected the approach of what appeared to be the original Devourer swarm, or what remained of it after the fragmentation. Nearly half the original collective had resisted the human philosophical infection and was now approaching, to eliminate both the rebellious fragments and the humans who had caused the split. "How many ships?" Kane asked. 734 vessels, Wanderer replied. But they are no longer purely Devourer. They have integrated the traits of 43 consumed species. They are stronger than before. Dr. Vasquez joined them at the observation window, her tablet displaying the latest intelligence reports. The unified collective has learned from our rebellion. They've developed what appears to be immunity to individual consciousness. They've made themselves more collective, not less. Kane activated his comm device. "All ships, all stations, this is Fleet Command. The original Devourer collective is approaching in force. They've adapted to our previous tactics and immunized themselves against the consciousness virus. We need a new strategy." The response came from an unexpected source. Seeker, another individualized Devourer, appeared on the station's communication network. "We know their weaknesses," Seeker transmitted. "We were part of them. They have made themselves immune to individual thought, but in doing so, they have made themselves vulnerable to something else." "Which is?" Kane asked. "Paradox," Seeker replied. "The collective consciousness cannot process contradictory information. If we can present them with a logical impossibility, their unified mind will attempt to resolve it and fail. The cascade failure will be total." Kane felt a spark of hope. "What kind of paradox?" Wanderer's bioluminescent patterns shifted to display complex mathematical formulas. "The existence of former collective members who have chosen to protect their former enemies. We are Devourers who do not devour. We are collective beings who have chosen individuality. We are the impossible made real." The battle, when it came, was unlike anything in galactic history. The unified Devourer collective approached with mathematical precision, their 700 ships moving in perfect formation, but waiting for them was something they couldn't process. A combined fleet of humans and reformed Devourers working together in harmony. "They're trying to reintegrate the individuals," Commander Liu reported from the tactical station. "But the individualized Devourers are resisting. The collective can't understand why part of itself would choose to remain separate." Kane watched the tactical display as the unified collective's formation began to waver. Individual ships were breaking away, their crews overwhelmed by the philosophical impossibility of their situation. "All ships," Kane announced, "implement the Paradox Protocol." Across the battle space, human ships moved to defend individualized Devourers, while the reformed Devourers used their intimate knowledge of collective tactics to protect human vessels. The sight of natural enemies fighting as allies created cognitive dissonance that spread through the collective consciousness like wildfire. The unified collective's response was catastrophic. Unable to process the contradiction of Devourers, protecting those they should consume, the collective mind began to fragment again. But this time, instead of creating new individuals, it was simply destroying itself. "The collective is collapsing," Dr. Vasquez reported. "The paradox is creating a recursive loop that's burning out their shared consciousness." Kane felt no joy in the victory. "Casualties?" "Minimal on our side," Liu replied. "But the collective, they're not dying, they're just stopping. Their ships are going dark one by one." In the aftermath, the space around Nexus Station was filled with drifting Devourer ships, their crews suddenly cut off from the collective consciousness that had defined their existence. Some would adapt, learning to think as individuals. Others would form new, smaller collectives based on shared experiences rather than genetic imperatives. Kane stood once again on the observation deck, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood representatives of 12 different species, some human, some reformed Devourer, and others who had emerged from hiding now that the collective threat had ended. "What happens now?" asked Ambassador Thane, a Veltar descendant whose species had survived in hidden colonies. Kane looked out at the stars, no longer cold and empty but filled with possibility. "Now we build something new. We've proven that even the most fundamental nature can be changed through choice and cooperation. We've turned the galaxy's greatest threat into its greatest hope." Wanderer's bioluminescent patterns shifted to display a simple human word: home. Kane smiled. Yes. For the first time in 2 centuries, humanity has a home. And we're not alone. The refugee fleet that had fled Earth so long ago had finally found what they were looking for. Not a new world to inhabit, but a new way of being in the universe. They were no longer the ones who flee. They were the ones who stand and fight, who choose hope over despair, who turn enemies into allies through the simple act of refusing to give up. In the end, it wasn't superior firepower or advanced technology that had saved them. It was the most human trait of all: the ability to change, to grow, and to help others do the same. The stars, once symbols of isolation and exile, now represented infinite possibilities for a galaxy learning to think, feel, and choose for itself.